The only mistake she made was offering kindness to the wrong man, or so she thought. They came at dawn, silent silhouettes atop horses, surrounding her ranch like ghosts summoned by the earth itself. Their war paint caught the early light, their eyes unmoving. Clara Whitmore stood barefoot in the dust, heart pounding like a drumbeat of fate, and all she could think was, this began with a cup of water. Just a day earlier, the ranch had been quiet. Too quiet. Clara had learned to live with silence since her father died last spring. The windmill creaked, the cows grazed, the sun scorched the ground as it always did. But Clara knew that silence in the desert wasn't peace. It was warning. That afternoon, while hauling a feed sack to the barn, she spotted something across the plain. A man. No, a shadow, staggering, bleeding. She dropped the sack. He was half collapsed, dragging one leg, the other impaled by an arrow. His chest was streaked with dried blood, his hands empty. Clara's gut tightened when she saw the markings on his skin, Apache. Her breath caught. She knew what folks in town would say. Leave him. Let him die. They wouldn't spare you. But Clara wasn't raised that way. Her mother, God rest her, used to say, kindness is the only bullet that never misses. So Clara ran. Straight into fear. Straight to him. He collapsed by her fence. She knelt beside him, trembling, and pressed a cloth to his wound. His eyes opened for a moment, deep brown, full of pain. He didn't beg. He didn't speak. He simply held out a small leather pouch. Inside was a smooth black stone she didn't understand. But when he croaked one word, water, she ran for the pump and brought him a tin cup. He drank like a dying animal. Then he passed out. She dragged him to the barn, laid him on hay, and bandaged his leg. He never stirred. And that night, Clara didn't sleep. Not because of the man she'd saved, but because the desert had fallen too quiet. Clara woke just before dawn, sweat clinging to her skin, though the desert air had turned cool. She hadn't meant to sleep, but exhaustion had stolen her beneath the stars. She sat up on the wooden floor of her cabin, heart racing, and listened. Nothing. No groans, no creaking boards, no rustling in the barn. She grabbed the shotgun from beside the door and stepped out, barefoot in the pale blue light. The barn loomed ahead like a slumped giant. She expected to find the man gone, or dead. But as she pushed open the door, what she found made her freeze. He was sitting up, his skin pale, jaw clenched in pain, but his eyes were alert now, dark and watchful. He said nothing. Neither did she. It was the kind of silence that weighed more than any words. I cleaned the wound, Clara finally said, voice brittle. Didn't take the arrow out. Too deep. You'd have bled. Still no reply. He reached for the pouch again, the one with the stone. He held it out to her, offering it like a sacred gift. I don't want anything, Clara whispered. Just don't bring trouble here. He placed the stone gently on the hay between them, then leaned back, wincing. Clara turned to leave, but paused. What's your name? A beat passed. Then softly, Tocho. She blinked. Tocho means mountain lion, he said. My mother named me for the way I fought as a child. There was pride in his voice, but weariness too. Clara nodded slowly. Well, Tocho, you're not on your feet yet. You try to walk out that door, you won't make it a mile. He looked at her, not with gratitude, but something older, deeper, a kind of measured respect. Outside, the wind picked up, but it wasn't the wind that raised the hair on Clara's neck. It was the sound that followed, a distant drumming in the earth, faint, rhythmic. She stepped outside. In the far-off hills, just where the desert kissed the horizon, shapes were moving. Riders, slow, purposeful. She turned back to the barn. Tocho, was standing now, leaning hard against the beam, sweat beading on his brow. "They're coming," he said quietly. "Because I didn't die." Clara didn't know whether to trust Tocho or run from him, but as the riders drew closer, kicking up a wall of dust behind them, one thing was certain. Her quiet little world was over. She stood near the barn with her father's shotgun gripped, tight, the barrels trembling just slightly. Her eyes scanned the horizon where 4, maybe 5 riders approached. All mounted, all fast. The dust cloud they raised looked like a storm made of bones. Tocho stood beside her now, barely upright, leaning on the fence post. He'd refused to sit down despite his wound, his jaw clenched in grim silence. "Your people?" Clara asked quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. As the riders neared, their paint and feathers became visible. Apache warriors, adorned, in symbols Clara had only seen in books or whispered about in town. Each face was marked with streaks of red and black, and their horses moved like they'd galloped across the world to be here. "They followed your trail," she said. "They followed my blood," Tocho corrected. One of the riders raised a hand, signaling the others to slow. They came to a halt just 100 yards out, watching, waiting. Tocho let out a slow breath. "They think I've been captured. Or worse." "And what happens now?" Clara asked. "If they believe I'm being held, they will attack, burn the ranch, kill everyone inside." Clara's heart pounded. "And if they believe you're safe?" He looked at her. "Then they will still come, but with questions. Not arrows." She stepped back, pulse racing. "I don't know your ways, Tocho. I just gave you water. I didn't ask for this." His eyes softened just slightly. "But you gave it. That means more than you think." He turned to her, his face pale but steady. "I need to stand before them. Show them I'm alive. Show them you are not the enemy." Clara's breath caught. "They'll see me as a threat no matter what." Tocho shook his head. "Not if I walk to them. Not if I hold the stone." He reached for the black stone she'd kept safe in her apron pocket. Clara stared at it. "What is it?" "A symbol," he said. "Not of peace, but of a debt. I owe you, Clara Whitmore, and my people will see that." Outside, the warriors began to move forward again, slow and steady. Clara gripped the stone, then pressed it into Tocho's hand. "Then let's show them the truth, before it's too late." The dust swirled like smoke as Tocho stepped forward, his body leaning heavily on Clara's old walking stick. Each step was agony, but he didn't show it. Clara followed just behind him, shotgun in hand, her heart thudding like a war drum. "Tao." Apache warriors sat motionless atop their horses as the two approached. Their eyes flicked to Clara, cold and unreadable. One of them, a tall man with silver streaks in his black braids, dismounted first. He stepped forward, gaze fixed on Tocho. Clara felt the air tighten. "Ni tai," Tocho said, his voice rough, but steady. The man didn't answer right away. Then finally, "You should be dead." "I'm not," Tocho replied, "because she helped me." The warriors exchanged glances. The tall one's jaw tightened. "She is white." "She is human," Tocho said. He opened his hand and showed them the black stone. It glinted in the sun like polished night. A murmur passed between the men. The tall warrior took a step closer. Clara's hands twitched on the shotgun, but Tocho raised a hand slightly. "Wait." "What did she want in return?" the warrior asked. "Nothing," Tocho said. "She pulled the arrow from my leg, gave me water. Let me sleep beneath her roof," one of the younger riders sneered. "And what will she want now? Gold? Protection?" Clara stepped forward before Tocho could answer. "I didn't do it for payment," she said. "I did it because he was bleeding. That's all." Her voice echoed in the open plain. The tall warrior stared at her, his eyes like carved obsidian, studied her like he could read the pages of her soul. Then slowly he nodded. "You are brave," he said, "and foolish. But that is what makes a heart worthy." He turned back to his horse. You owe her, Tocho, and so do we. Clara blinked. Wait, what? But they were already mounting up again. Tocho turned to her. You'll be safe. For now. For now? She asked. He looked toward the mountains where smoke curled faintly in the sky. There are others, who won't forgive so easily. Clara followed his gaze. The horizon seemed farther away than ever. That evening, the ranch was quieter than ever, but not in the peaceful way Clara had known. It was the quiet that comes after something breaks, when you're not sure whether you're safe or simply waiting for the next storm. Tocho rested in the eye. Barn again, his wound cleaned and bandaged. Clara had offered him a meal, beans and bread, the only things she had left from the last supply run. He'd accepted with a nod and little else. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in orange and fire red, Clara sat on the porch steps, shotgun beside her. She watched the horizon. No riders, no dust, just silence. But her heart wasn't. Still, she heard Tocho's voice behind her. You don't trust me yet. She didn't turn. You didn't tell me they'd come with weapons. I didn't know, he said honestly. I left my people in anger. I didn't expect them to follow or care. Clara glanced back at him. He looked older in the twilight, like the desert had carved its story into his bones. Why did you leave? She asked. Tocho leaned against the doorframe, exhaling slowly. I refused a blood oath. They wanted vengeance for something that happened long ago. I wanted peace. They called me a coward. So I left. Clara looked down at her hands. And now you brought their war to my doorstep. No, he said. I brought you their respect. There's a difference. She wasn't sure if that was comforting, but when he sat beside her, staring out into the growing dark, something shifted. Not friendship, not yet, but understanding. Still, deep in the wind, Clara smelled something faint, unnatural. Smoke. It wasn't from her chimney, and it wasn't from the Apache camp. It came from the east. Tocho's head turned sharply. That's not good. Clara stood, shotgun in hand once more. What is it? She asked. Tocho narrowed, his eyes at the haze rising in the distance. White riders, he said, and they're burning something on their way here. The fire was spreading fast. Clara stood at the edge of her ranch, squinting into the smoke rising from the eastern plains. The wind carried the scent of burning timber, of homes, of lives being reduced to ash. Tocho was beside her, eyes narrowed as he scanned the distance. His hands were clenched, every muscle taut with focus. Are you sure? Clara asked, her voice a whisper caught between fear and disbelief. Tocho didn't answer right away. He was listening, sensing the change in the wind. Then, in a low voice, he said, They're coming, the White Riders. They'll want more than blood. They'll want your land. Clara swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the shotgun. But why? What do they want with me? Tocho's eyes flicked to hers. Not just you. They want the ranch, the valley, and they won't stop until they take it. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The valley had been her family's for generations. They'd worked the land, fought the droughts, and built a life from the soil itself. But she knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about land. Not anymore. The riders were coming, and with them a storm that no one could outrun. I'll defend this place, Clara said, voice steady despite the rising panic inside her. Tocho turned to her, eyes shadowed with something that was not fear, but understanding. You can't fight them alone. She looked at him sharply. Then what do you suggest? We run? No, he said quietly. But we can't let them come unchallenged. Clara's heart skipped. What do you mean? They won't just burn your ranch, Tocho explained. They'll burn your reputation, your name. They'll turn everyone against you. Your neighbors, the townsfolk, everyone. They'll make sure no one believes you, no one helps. Clara clenched her fists. Then I'll make them believe me. She turned back to the horizon, the smoke now thick in the air. The riders were closer. Too close. "We have to fight," she said, determination in her voice. "We don't have a choice." Tocho nodded slowly. "We'll fight, but we'll need help. From people who know what it's like to fight for something that matters." Clara's mind raced. Who could help us now? Then the thought hit her like a lightning bolt. The Apache, the very people who had once been her enemies. But if she could show them the same respect she had shown Tocho, could they be her allies now? Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with maps, torn pages from her father's old ledger, and a half-burned lantern. Tocho rested nearby, the pain in his leg pulsing, but his mind sharp as ever. Outside, the smoke still curled over the horizon. "They're not just bandits," Tocho said, breaking the silence. "They're ex-scouts. Some were paid by the army once, before they turned into wolves." Clara traced her finger along the valley line on the map. "How many do you think?" "At least a dozen," he replied. "Hard men, mean men, and they've killed before." Clara stared at the old creek trail leading into the canyons. It was narrow, treacherous, and perfect for an ambush. "We can't outgun them," she said. "No," Tocho agreed, "but we can outsmart them." And that's when Clara made the boldest decision of her life. "We ride at first light," she said, "to the Apache camp." Tocho blinked. "You'd ride into their territory? Uninvited?" "You said they respected me," Clara answered. "If there's a chance they'll stand beside us, I'll take it." Tocho looked at her with something deeper than admiration, perhaps the first flicker of faith. By dawn, Clara was saddling the mare her father once rode during cattle drives. The saddle creaked under her, but her resolve didn't. They rode east, into the canyons where shadows clung to the rock walls and the only sound was hooves on dust. Tocho guided them through forgotten paths, his voice low, pointing out silent markers of his people. A scratched stone, a feather tied in a bush, a symbol drawn in ash. Then, suddenly, they weren't alone. 10 warriors stood waiting in the narrow, pass weapons drawn. One of them stepped forward. It was the tall one from before, his expression unreadable but not hostile. "You return," he said to Tocho. Tocho nodded, then turned to Clara. "She comes with respect, and with fire behind her." Clara dismounted, lifted her chin, and said loud enough for every ear, "There are white riders coming to burn my land. They won't stop there. They'll come for the hills next, for your people, for your water. Help me, and we fight for both our homes." Silence. Then the tall warrior did something Clara didn't expect. He smiled. "Perhaps the world needs women like you," he said. He raised his hand, and behind him, a wave of warriors stepped forward. Painted, armed, ready, an alliance had been born. The ride back to Clara's ranch felt different this time. Not lonely, not desperate. It felt like thunder rolling across the plains. Behind Clara and Tocho rode a formation of Apache warriors, silent, sharp-eyed, and deadly. They moved like part of the land itself, every motion purposeful. Clara could feel the energy shift in the wind. As they approached the ranch, the skies had turned a dull gray, clouds gathering like witnesses to what was coming. Inside the barn, Clara spread her maps across the hay-covered floor. "They'll come through the east trail," she said. "The fire line tells us that much. If we can funnel them into the narrow gully, they'll lose their numbers advantage." The tall Apache warrior, his name now revealed to be Red Hawk, nodded thoughtfully. "We will take positions above. Rain arrows like hawks from stone." Tocho added, "Clara, you must be their bait. They're coming for you. Make them see only you." Clara blinked. "You want me to stand in the open?" Tocho looked her dead in the eye. "You want them to fall? Let them believe they've already won." For a moment, fear gripped her. But then she remembered her father, standing on this land during the worst drought the valley had ever seen. He'd said, "We don't leave because it gets hard. We stand because it's ours." And now it wasn't just hers. It was theirs. Night fell. The warriors took position. Clara sharpened fence posts into spikes. Tocho dipped arrows into oil, stacking them in neat bundles near the lookout. And in the darkest part of the barn, Clara opened a small wooden box. Inside was her mother's revolver, still polished, still loaded. She whispered, "Mama, if you're watching, I'm gonna need your aim tonight." Then she holstered it at her hip. Just before dawn, a low rumble echoed from the eastern trail. Dust. Hoofbeats. The white riders were coming. Red Hawk climbed to his perch with a bow in hand. Tocho stood beside Clara in the open field, a torch in one hand, and in the other, a whistle made of eagle bone. Clara took her stance by the corral fence, shotgun resting across her arms. She wasn't just defending land now, she was standing. For every woman told she was too weak, every outsider cast aside, every voice silenced by fire and greed. The first thing Clara saw was dust, rolling over the ridge like a brown wave. Then came the sound, hoofbeats, pounding the earth with the hunger of wolves. Tocho raised the eagle bone whistle to his lips and blew. A high, sharp note sliced through the morning stillness. From the canyon edges, Red Hawk's warriors shifted, silent, hidden. Clara stood in the open, alone, hat low, shotgun cradled like it was an extension of her spine. She counted 12 riders, all armed, guns slung on hips. One of them had a long coat and a red bandana across his face, their leader. He pulled his horse to a stop, dust swirling at his boots. "Well now," he drawled, "you must be the lady with the soft heart for savages." Clara didn't flinch. "This is my land," she said coldly, "and you're trespassing." The man laughed. "No, ma'am, you see, this was never yours. Just borrowed time. The rail company wants this stretch. And you're just in the way." He raised his hand, a signal. His men spread out, rifles drawn. Clara breathed in, slow. Wait, Tocho whispered beside her. "Now!" Whiz, an arrow flew from the ridge, silent, precise, burying itself in the shoulder of a rider. Chaos. Gunfire erupted. Horses reared. One man fell from his saddle. Another screamed as a fire-tipped arrow ignited his coat. Clara dove behind a hay cart, rolled, and returned fire. Boom! Her shotgun blast knocking a rifle clean from a rider's hands. The riders were trained killers, but they hadn't expected resistance like this. From the cliffs, Apache warriors rained down fire and stone. Their war cries cut through the smoke like thunder. Tocho, though wounded, moved with deadly grace, slicing through the chaos with a blade in one hand and his torch in the other. Clara reloaded, ducked, fired again, this time hitting a man in the leg. But even as riders fell, the leader in the red bandana kept moving forward, his eyes locked on Clara. "You'll die tired, lady," he shouted. "No one's coming to save you." Clara stood up, blood on her sleeve, dirt in her hair. "I don't need saving," she shouted back. "I brought the storm with me." And as if summoned by her voice, Red Hawk leapt from the cliffs, blade flashing in the sun, and landed right in front of the red bandana man. Steel clashed, hooves thundered, and the real battle had just begun. The air was thick with smoke and gunpowder. Red Hawk and the bandana-wearing leader clashed like thunder and lightning, one swift and silent, the other brutal and wild. Blades flashed, fists landed, and hooves tore up the earth around them. Clara ducked behind the trough, breathing hard. Her shoulder throbbed where a bullet had grazed her, but she didn't have time to stop. She loaded the last shell into her shotgun when she heard Tocho yell, "Behind you!" Clara spun, fired, boom! And dropped a rider who had snuck behind the barn. But then she saw something that made her blood go cold. One of the fallen riders wasn't a stranger. He was wearing the sheriff's badge. Clara stumbled closer, and pulled the bandana from his face. It was Sheriff McCrae's. Deputy, what the hell is going on? Tocho limped to her side. You know him. He's from town, Clara said, stunned. I've sold cattle to his father. He's supposed to be law. Tocho looked grim. There is no law here, Clara. Just men who take what they want. Suddenly, it made sense. The railroad, the pressure to sell, the anonymous threats, the delayed telegrams, the fire. They hadn't just come to rob her, they came to erase her. They're working with the company, Clara whispered. The sheriff, maybe even the mayor. This isn't just a raid, it's a cover-up. Tocho's expression darkened. Then the fire's just the beginning. They both turned as a scream echoed from the canyon. One of the Apache warriors had fallen. Red Hawk, still locked in battle, shouted something in his native tongue. His blade caught the outlaw's side, but not before a bullet clipped his thigh. Clara saw the leader stumble, bleeding, but not finished. I'm going after him, Clara said. You can't, Tocho warned. It's a trap. I don't care, she replied. He's the head of the snake. If I don't cut him off, this won't end. Not today, not ever. Tocho looked into her eyes and saw something no bullet could stop. Resolve. Clara grabbed her mother's revolver, mounted her father's old horse, and charged through the smoke. Toward the outlaw leader, toward the truth, toward destiny. Clara's horse thundered across the scorched earth, dodging fallen rifles and dying flames. Ahead, the outlaw leader, still bleeding from Red Hawk's blade, broke away from the fight and vanished into the tree line near the dry creek bed. She followed him. The ranch, the warriors, the gunfire, all faded behind her like a nightmare, dissolving at dawn. In the twisted trees and ash-covered trail, she found him, standing, waiting, smiling. His bandana was gone now, revealing a scarred jaw and sharp eyes like broken glass. He looked older up close, more worn than wild. But there was a calmness about him, the kind that comes from cruelty practiced like religion. I figured you'd come, he said, voice low. You got your mama's fire. I knew her, you know, back when this land was nothing but dust and bones. Clara's fingers tensed around her revolver. Don't speak her name. Oh, I'll do more than speak it, he sneered. I buried her dreams, just like I'll bury yours. You think you're some hero, some frontier queen? He took a slow step forward. You're just another settler squatting on gold. Clara blinked. Gold? The man smirked. You really don't know, do you? The stream that cuts through your ranch, underneath it lies enough ore to fund 100 railroads. Your pa figured it out. That's why he died. And now the company wants what's left. Her heart dropped. Her father's accident, the sudden pressure to sell, the growing interest in her worthless land. It had never been about cattle or fences. It was about what lay beneath. You killed my father, she whispered. No, darlin', he said, drawing his pistol. I just cleared the way. Now step aside, and maybe I'll let you keep one good leg. But Clara didn't step back. She remembered her mama's voice in her head. Stand like you belong to the land, not just on it. So she raised her revolver and pulled the trigger. Crack! The bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him backward into the dirt. She rushed forward, kicked his weapon away, and stood over him, breathing heavy. You're right, she said. I am like my mama. Then she cocked the revolver again. Back. At the ranch, the last of the outlaws were either dead or retreating. Red Hawk stood with Tocho on the ridge, watching Clara return, bloodied, bruised, but standing tall. She had survived the fire. Now she held the truth, and she wasn't done yet. Clara stood at the edge of the dry creek bed, her revolver still smoking, heart pounding like war drums. The outlaw leader groaned, clutching his bleeding shoulder. You don't know what you've started, he hissed. I know exactly what I've started, she replied coldly, and I'm going to finish it. She picked up a weathered leather satchel from his saddlebag. Inside, maps, mining reports, and a contract with the seal of Railstar Mining Company. Clear title transfer upon accidental vacancy of homestead. Clara's stomach turned. Her family's land had been marked for takeover long before the fire. This wasn't war. It was business. Ruthless, silent, legal on the surface, but built on blood and betrayal. She returned to the ranch where the Apache warriors had regrouped. Red Hawk stood tall, arm in a sling, while Tocho was binding the last of the wounded. Clara laid out the documents on a crate and pointed. They've been buying out this whole valley with blood money, and when someone says no, fire follows. Tocho studied the papers, jaw clenched. This is bigger than we thought. Clara nodded. The town's in on it. Sheriff, deputy, maybe even the preacher. Red Hawk said nothing, but his gaze shifted to the hills. There is one more thing we can do, he finally said. What's that? Clara asked. Expose them, he said. Publicly. With witnesses. Clara raised an eyebrow. You think the town's going to believe me? A woman, and you... She looked at Red Hawk. You think they'll listen to an Apache? Red Hawk smirked faintly. Then let's give them something they can't ignore. That night, Clara rode into town, covered in dust, clothes torn, and a satchel full of truth strapped to her back. Tocho and Red Hawk followed from the shadows. The saloon was full. The sheriff sat at his usual table, laughing with men in polished boots and clean collars. When Clara stepped through the doors, silence fell. She walked straight to the sheriff's table, dropped the satchel onto it, and opened the flap. Maps. Names, signatures, gold claims, murder trails. You've got two choices, Clara said. Start explaining, or start running. The sheriff stood up slowly, hand near his gun. But then came the sound of hooves outside, Apache warriors. Not armed for war, but standing in silent formation. The town stared out the windows, and for the first time, they saw who really owned the land and who had bled for it. Silence held the saloon like a noose. Clara's voice cut through it like a blade. This town's been bought. My ranch was burned. My father, murdered. And all of you? She looked at each face. You watched. The sheriff's fingers twitched, near his holster. Red Hawk stepped forward from the door, flanked by two Apache warriors. Their presence was thunder without sound. A murmur rippled through the room. What's the meaning of this? Barked Mayor Hargrove from the corner. We don't take kindly to... Clara cut him off. You'll take kindly to the truth. She threw a worn document on the bar. Here's your signature, Mayor. Granting exploratory access to my family's creek. Backdated. Forged. She pointed to another. And this, Sheriff, your deputy signing off on the emergency fire clearance before the fire ever started. Gasps filled the room. Even the piano player stopped mid-note. The sheriff's hand moved, but Red Hawk was faster. Thwack! His tomahawk landed inches from the sheriff's wrist, embedding into the wood. Try it, Red Hawk said, calm as ice. The sheriff backed down, sweat beading on his brow. Mayor Hargrove stood, trying to regain control. You think this proves anything? It's her word and a bunch of old papers against respected men. That's when Tocho stepped in, holding a rusted tin box. He opened it, revealing a wax-sealed letter signed by a Railstar executive, detailing payouts to the sheriff, mayor, and 2 ranchers. Clara read it aloud. Ensure the girl is removed, quietly, discredit if necessary, no survivors preferred. The townspeople looked horrified. A rancher's wife gasped. My husband took money from them? Another voice rose. They were going to burn my land. Next, chaos swelled. A few brave men stood up. She's telling the truth. I saw the company men surveying her land months before the fire. Same here, another added. They offered me cash to move. The sheriff finally snapped. He lunged at Clara, but before he reached her, the bartender, a quiet old man named Jed, swung a shotgun from beneath the bar. Click. Sit down, Sheriff, he said. Before someone puts you down for good. The sheriff dropped his gun. Mayor Hargrove slipped out the back, but Red Hawk followed. Outside, the Apache warriors surrounded the town square. No violence, no threats, just presence. And in that presence, came truth. Clara stood tall, not just a rancher's daughter, not just a widow of fire, but a voice the town had to hear. The night air outside the saloon was heavy with tension. The sheriff, now disarmed and cornered, was tied to a post in the center of town. His badge lay in the dirt beside him, glinting under the moonlight like a lie exposed. Clara stared at him, her jaw tight. "You sent men to kill me. You burned my family's name off the land. And for what? A gold vein and a corporate bonus?" Then, Sheriff didn't speak. His pride was the last thing he had left to swallow. Tocho walked up beside her, holding the sealed contract they'd found in the outlaw leader's saddlebag. "This proves collusion, but proof don't bring back what's lost." The townsfolk stood in a wide circle, watching, silent, some ashamed, some angry. Some finally seeing the world for what it was. Jed, the bartender, asked gently, "What do you want us to do, Clara?" Clara looked around, at the people who once crossed the street to avoid her, at the men who let her fight alone, at the women who whispered behind curtains while her house burned, and then she looked at Red Hawk standing tall, arms folded. A man who had every reason to hate this town, but chose to protect it anyway. "I don't want blood," Clara finally said. "I want this town to see, to remember." She turned to the sheriff. "You'll face a federal judge, not a lynch mob. Because unlike you, I still believe in something bigger than fear." The sheriff laughed bitterly. "You think the law's gonna save you now? It belongs to men like me." "Not anymore," Clara said. "It belongs to anyone willing to fight for it." With dawn breaking, Clara rode to the telegraph office, Red Hawk beside her. Tocho trailing behind, wounded but unbowed. They wired the federal marshal in Carson City, crimes of conspiracy, forgery, arson, murder, backed by signatures and witnesses. This time, the truth wouldn't burn, it would shine. At noon, the Apache warriors left the ridge. No spoils taken, no victory claimed. Just dignity returned. Before Red Hawk departed, Clara handed him something, a ring from her father's desk. "Thank you," she said. "You saved more than just a ranch." Red Hawk took it, nodding. "And you gave water to a dying man. That's more powerful than any treaty." Back at the ranch, Clara stood where her barn once stood, ashes at her feet, but hope on the horizon, because now, justice was riding in, and she wasn't alone anymore. The noon sun beat down hard on the dusty town square. Heat shimmered off rooftops as if the fire Clara had survived had never truly left. But today, the silence was broken by the rhythmic thunder of hooves. From the north trail, 6 riders emerged, coats dusted with travel, stars pinned to their chests, like shields of justice. Marshal Alden, a stern-faced man with silver hair and cold eyes, led the way. He dismounted slowly, eyes scanning the townsfolk who'd gathered in nervous silence. Clara stepped forward, documents in hand. "I'm Clara Westcott," she said clearly. "Owner of the Westcott Ranch. These men," she pointed to the tied sheriff, "and his 2 deputies, committed arson, conspired to murder, and tried to steal land through forged contracts." Marshal Alden didn't blink. He took the documents, scanning them with the practiced eye of a man who'd seen too many lies. "You have witnesses?" he asked. Tocho and Jed stepped forward. "I signed a contract under threat," Jed said. "I found the maps and letters myself," added Tocho, "before they could be burned." The townspeople murmured in agreement. This time, no one stayed silent. Marshal Alden nodded once. "We'll take them into custody. You'll testify?" Clara raised her chin. "I'll say it under oath, every word. As the corrupt sheriff and his deputies were loaded onto the wagons, the mayor tried to slip away but was caught by Red Hawk and brought forward." "I didn't know about the fire," Hargrove stammered. "I only signed a development permit. You sold your soul and blamed the smoke on the wind," Clara said, voice steady. "That's enough for me. Marshal Alden cuffed him too. We'll let a judge sort out the rest." By sundown, the town had changed. Signs of rebuilding began around Clara's ranch. Men who once turned their backs were now raising fence posts. Women brought food. Children carried water. The scar left by betrayal hadn't healed, but it had stopped bleeding. Clara stood beside Red Hawk one last time as the sun dipped behind. "The ridge. I couldn't have done it without you," she said. Red Hawk shook his head. "You didn't need me. You just needed to remember who you were." "And who am I?" He looked at her. The woman who gave water to a wounded Apache and reminded a whole town what honor looks like. The town square was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't fear that kept people silent. It was respect. Marshal Alden and his men had left with the prisoners in tow. Justice was in motion. But for Clara, the real work was just beginning. She stood at the edge of her ranch. What was left of it? Blackened wood, a scorched windmill. The barn was gone, and the old oak tree, where her father once told stories, stood leafless and brittle, but the land still breathed, and so did Clara. With help from Tocho and a few town volunteers, the first new beam of wood was raised by sunrise. Jed brought nails and rope. Even the banker, who once refused Clara a loan, showed up with a fresh ledger and offered a clean start. "I was wrong," he admitted. "You've got more grit than half the men I've financed." Clara didn't smile, but she nodded. "I don't want favors, I want fair terms." "You'll get them," he replied. Later, as Clara walked the land with Red Hawk, he said quietly, "Your father would have been proud." She looked down at her calloused hands, then up at the vast sky. "He taught me how to fight for what's right. I just never thought I'd have to do it alone." "You weren't alone," Red Hawk replied. "You just had to lose everything to see who'd stand beside you." By the third day, a new frame for the barn stood tall. Children came to help paint. One little girl handed Clara a flower and whispered, "You're brave." Clara knelt down. "So are you. Don't let anyone tell you different." One evening, as the stars blinked to life, Red Hawk approached with news. "My tribe is moving east for the season. It's time." Clara's heart sank, but she nodded. "You saved my life." He shook his head. "You saved mine." They stood in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken gratitude. Then he reached into his pouch and handed her something, a pendant, hand-carved, shaped like water flowing from a mountain, for the woman who offered water to a dying man, he said. She clutched it tightly. As he rode away, Clara stood tall, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a rebuilder, a rancher reborn. Clara stood in the middle of her growing ranch, the barn now fully rebuilt, new crops being planted, and workers already digging new irrigation trenches. The land, once charred and broken, was coming back to life. But as the earth healed, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that another battle loomed on the horizon. She knew the town wouldn't accept her leadership easily. The same men who had turned their backs on her were now forced to recognize her strength. But did they respect her, or were they waiting for her to fall? It was a week after the marshal's visit that Clara received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mayor Hargrove. "You've stirred something dangerous, Clara. The people are watching, and some aren't as forgiving as you. The railroad. Men won't be pleased with your interference. You're playing with fire." The letter ended with a chilling sentence. "You can't outrun what's coming." Clara sat on the porch of the newly restored ranch house, holding the letter. Tocho was beside her, sharpening his knife. "He's threatening you," Tocho said flatly. "I'm not running," Clara replied, her voice steady. "I've fought for this land once. I'll do it again." But in her heart, a seed of doubt had been planted. The next day, a group of ranchers arrived, led by the tall figure of Harrison Cole, the same man who'd once tried to buy her land. His reputation for ruthlessness had made him one of the wealthiest men in the county. "I've come to offer you a deal," Harrison said, tipping his hat with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Clara didn't trust him, but she didn't show it. What kind of deal? You're rebuilding. I respect that. But this valley belongs to the railroad now, and I'm sure you don't want to see another fire burn this place down. Clara clenched her fists, feeling the old heat rise in her chest. You want to take what's mine, Cole? Harrison held up his hands in mock surrender. Not at all. I want to help you. I'm offering a partnership. I have the resources to help you build a real ranch. A ranch that will make you more money than you ever dreamed of. But Clara saw through him. And what's the price? Harrison smiled again, but this time it was colder. The price? Your land. Your power. You work with me and I'll keep the fires away. You refuse. Well, let's just say I know a few people who'll make things difficult for you. Clara felt the weight of his words. A choice. She could accept the deal, become part of the system that had almost destroyed her family. Or she could stand firm and risk losing everything she'd worked so hard to rebuild. She looked at Tocho. He was silent, but the hard look in his eyes told her he understood the stakes. As the sun set over the land she'd fought so hard to protect, Clara knew she was standing at a crossroads. The fire was no longer just in her past. It was in her future, too. The sun dipped low behind the hills as Clara stood alone on her porch, Harrison Cole's offer echoing in her mind like the final beat of a war drum. She hadn't answered him, not yet, but silence in times like these was its own kind of defiance. Tocho returned from the town late that evening, dust on his boots and fire in his eyes. They're moving fast, he said. Cole's hired men are sniffing around your land boundaries. Heard talk of surveyors coming tomorrow. Clara folded the letter from Hargrove and tucked it into her coat. He wants to intimidate me. Tocho nodded. They think if they scare you enough, you'll fold. But Clara's eyes were steady now, like steel cooled in water. I folded once, when they burned this ranch, when I buried my father's saddle. I won't fold again. That night she gathered everyone who'd helped rebuild, Jed, the blacksmith, the banker, even a few former doubters who'd started to believe in her strength. We can't let men like Cole decide the fate of this land, Clara said. They already took too much. If we don't draw a line now, they'll push us all. Off it, Jed raised his hand. What do you want from us, Clara? Truth, she said. And backbone. I need witnesses. I need workers. I need people who will stand with me when the sun rises. No one spoke for a moment. Then the banker stepped forward. You've earned that, Clara. I'll notarize your land claim. For free. And just like that, the tide turned. By dawn, Clara was already in the fields. Tocho and a few of Red Hawk's remaining scouts had placed boundary markers and rigged bells to alert them of intruders, and then they came. 3 riders, hired guns. Hard-faced, cold-eyed men who didn't care about laws, just money. We're here to inspect the property, one said, spitting into the dirt. Clara stood tall. You've got no papers, no right, and no business here. They dismounted anyway. Tocho stepped out from the brush, bow drawn. Jed appeared from behind the haystack, holding a rifle. One of the men froze. This isn't worth the paycheck, he muttered. The other 2 hesitated, then turned back. Clara didn't chase them. She didn't need to. Her message had been sent. That evening, she received another letter, this one unsigned. You just made enemies of powerful men. Be ready. Clara burned it in the fireplace. Then she walked outside, watching the wind ripple. Through the tall grass, they could threaten her land, her peace, even her life. But they could never touch the fire in her soul. The sky hung heavy with storm clouds as the final day approached. Word had spread like wildfire across the valley. Harrison Cole was riding in, with 5 armed men and a signed court injunction, courtesy of corrupt connections back east. Clara stood by the ranch gate, a rifle slung across her back, her coat flapping in the wind. She had no army, just a few loyal friends, and the weight of every wrong she'd suffered still fresh in her bones. Tocho stepped beside her. You don't have to face him alone. I'm not alone, Clara said quietly. Not anymore. At noon, dust rose on the horizon. Cole's riders came in a V formation, smooth, practiced, intimidating. Harrison himself rode at the front, dressed in a black coat, silver trim, and an ivory-handled revolver resting at his hip. He dismounted like a man about to claim his prize, not earn it. I gave you a chance, he said, voice like gravel. You, spit on it. Clara stepped forward, chin high. You offered poison with a silver spoon. I don't drink that. He chuckled coldly. You've got fire, Clara, but fire burns out when the wind turns. Cole's men moved to spread out, hands near their holsters. But before they could fan out, the church bell rang. From the hills, a group of townsfolk came down. Jed, the banker, the blacksmith, a few families Clara had once helped during the drought. Even the children watched from behind wagons. They weren't armed, but they were present, and they were watching. Cole looked around, jaw clenched. You think this makes you strong? No, Clara said, but it makes you weak. You ride with fear. I ride with truth. If you want this land, you'll have to take it by force. In front of them! Tocho raised his bow. Jed cocked his rifle. Cole's fingers twitched toward his gun. But then, he saw something shift in his men. One of them shook his head subtly. They didn't want a war. Not today. Not over a woman who refused to be broken. Cole spat into the dust. You'll regret this. No, Clara said. You will. And with that, he mounted up and turned away. No shots fired, no blood spilled, just the sound of hooves fading and power slipping from a man who thought he owned everything. As the sun dipped low, Clara stood by her rebuilt fence line. The land was hers again. Not because it was granted, but because she refused to give it up. In that silence, wind brushing over the fields, she whispered to herself, Pa, it's ours again, and they'll never take it from me. Weeks passed since Harrison Cole rode. Away defeated. The town, once suspicious of Clara, now looked to her for guidance. She had become something no one expected, a symbol. Not just of strength, but of fairness, of unbending truth. The ranch flourished again. The barn echoed with the sounds of life, cattle mooing, children laughing, wood being sawn for expansion. The fields turned green. The well Clara once used to save a dying Apache now watered acres of wheat. One evening, as golden light spilled across the land, Clara found herself sitting by the old oak tree, the one that survived the fire. In her hand, she held Red Hawk's pendant. She remembered the first time she saw him bleeding on her land. She had no idea that by offering him water, she would change her entire life. Now, she wore the pendant on a leather cord around her neck. It was her reminder. Compassion is never weakness. It is the beginning of everything. The town elected a new mayor, one who promised land protections for settlers and natives alike. Tocho stayed nearby, helping Clara bridge the gap between the ranchers and the Apache tribe. One day, a young girl from town came to visit Clara. She was shy, holding a notebook. I heard your story, she said. I want to write it down someday. Is that okay? Clara smiled. Only if you write the truth, that I was scared, that I almost gave up. But I didn't. The girl nodded, eyes shining. Years passed. And when Clara passed on, old, proud, and unbroken, the town gathered at her ranch. The windmill turned slowly, the oak tree taller than ever. No one remembered Harrison Cole. But everyone remembered Clara Whitmore, not as the woman who fought back, but as the woman who gave water to a dying man and started a revolution of kindness that changed a town.